Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgout. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where every week I recommend something to Louis. Louis recommends something to me. And then in the episode following, we discuss whatever those things are. Today's episode, every now and then we'll do an occasional theme. Today's episode is no theme, but we are going to be discussing two music recommendations, which I would say happens not frequently, but not infrequently, because Louis recommends a lot of music.
Yeah, that's just true. I don't know. What am I supposed to say? Sorry? I'm not sorry.
Louis, the people have been wanting to know why.
Why do I recommend so much
Like
music?
every day they're banging on my door. It's getting really annoying. They're coming to my door. They're saying, "Why does Get Recc'd have so much music?" And I say, "Look, first of all, it's kind of frankly scary that you know my house address. Secondly, also our audience is only like 7 people. So how do you know where we live?" But thirdly, Louis, I'll pose the question to you. Why so much music?
Well, the thing is, I just fucking hate music. Like, I hate it. It's, like, probably the worst thing. Next to a world-ending catastrophe, I would put music probably right below that. So, like, if I had to pick between a world-ending catastrophe and music, I would probably choose music, but it'd be a bit of a toss-up.
Yeah, well, what a lot of our listeners don't know, actually, Louis, and this is kind of why I wanted to just give a little peek behind the curtain. What our listeners don't necessarily realize is that actually every time you give a music recommendation, you're expecting me to just trash it because you also just hate every music.
Music.
And what people in the audience, I think, don't realize is actually our ranking system has always been out of 100. So at best, we're only giving 10s here out of 100.
Yeah. Which, sometimes music can reach maybe that level if it's lucky, but I don't know. It's very difficult.
Well, I just wanted to say to everyone out there, Get Recc'd is a podcast where we celebrate all mediums, and sometimes we celebrate music and video games. Sometimes we celebrate movies and YouTube channels. Sometimes we celebrate podcasts, but never anything else. Nothing else is worth celebrating.
Yeah, facts. That's just a fact. Books suck. Reading, lame, nerd.
Yeah, get that out of here.
Anyway, well, since we are just spending our time trashing music, I think
software? Who needs a software? You know what I'm saying? Like,
actually, you know what? Maybe we should do a spin-off podcast, Get Recc'd Tech. And we'll do like tech reviews. We'll become like tech bros. We both kind of fit the image for a tech.
Every
bro.
week we'll tell people how long we have been using the free trial of WinRAR, and then the government will find us.
Wow. Now when you put it that way, I don't know about this one. Well, anyway.
Well, what I do know about is Louis. I believe what you recommended to me.
I was going to do the other order. I guess we could do that.
Or what I recommended to you, because I know about that one even more. And Louis, that was Running with Scissors, the Weird Al Yankovic album. It was released on June 29th of 1999. This was Weird Al's 4th album, although at this point, I don't know if I'd say he had a lot of EPs or singles or whatever you would call them, but essentially he did do a lot of work on various montage mixes and things like Dr. Demento and other things. But for his own personal release, this was 4th in his lineup.
Wait, what? No, this is like his, 10th album or something?
Do you think Wikipedia is wrong, Louis?
Wait, did Wikipedia say Running with Scissors is the 4th Weird Al album? That is not correct.
It was the 4th studio album self-produced by Yankovic.
Oh, self-produced. Oh, it's saying self-produced. No. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean...
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. There's, other stuff that he's done elsewhere and through other productions.
No, I mean, Wow, I like this. This is fun. This is a good part of Get Recc'd when we argue about facts and not the actual point. I think. So I don't know who was his producer prior, but like he had. This would be 10th studio album, I think. 10th, yes, it would be the 10th studio album. But I guess he started producing albums, started producing his own work with Off the Deep End. That is what that would mean.
Yeah, and what's important about Get Recc'd actually as a podcast is what we like to do is we like to read Wikipedia articles and then just trash them. You know, like we're going to go in and just absolutely destroy this Wikipedia article.
Well, that Wikipedia article is awful because it is misleading. It's not factually inaccurate. It's just misleading. And I, therefore, despise Wikipedia with all of my might now.
Yeah, we can no longer use it as a source in schools. Get it out of here.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, whatever. Not that that matters that much, but it is interesting that it's the fourth one he self-produced. Because I don't know. I've heard all of his albums. And I will say Running with Scissors is probably the best sounding of all of them. So good job, Weird Al, I guess. You might have done better than your actual producer prior, which is pretty cool. But anyway, it's funny. I told Steven this at the end of the last episode, which might have been cheating to some extent, but who cares? Actually, last episode, I was also considering recommending Steven this album too. So I don't know how that worked out or why I decided not to. I guess the universe just wanted Steven to do it. But yeah, no, I mean, this album's great. I mean, I have heard every single Weird Al album, and I would say this is handily his best work because it is consistently very funny. It sounds very good, which isn't the most important thing for a comedy album, but it does allow you to focus purely on that. You're not fixating on anything else. I mean, the ability of his band to play chameleon here is possibly better than it ever was before. Like, even on prior parodies, there are a lot that sometimes can sound off from the original. And here, I don't think that ends up being a problem almost at all. It's just super consistent. It's just very consistently fun. I don't think the songs here are his funniest ever. There are a few, but for the most part, not necessarily. It's just that, like, I don't think this album ever misses. Like, I don't think there's a track on this album that isn't funny to some degree or isn't fun or isn't entertaining. It's just really, really solid.
And to me, this out of most of his albums, I feel one of the most consistent style parody. Like, you can really feel the style influence in a lot of his originals in this album. Now, it's still kind of interspersed between, obviously, actual song parodies, but I really enjoy the style parodies coming off of this one. Lewis, would you say, and I definitely agree, I think this would probably be tops for me as far as his repertoire. Would you say that this, I feel like, or well, I would say, first of all, between this and maybe Poodle Hat, I kind of go back and forth. But would you say that this would be his most well-known? I feel like I would probably give that to Straight Outta Linwood, just because I feel like White Nerdy became so gigantic that I sort of feel like that might be his most well-known album. But I feel like Running with Scissors is his most well-deserving.
Well, yeah, there was definitely Straight Outta Linwood. There was also Mandatory Fun, which hit #1 in the album charts, period, for the first time for him. I don't know if that album's had the lasting impact. Not that any of his albums had like a huge impact or anything. I don't really know. It's hard to say. But if I had, it would be between those three. But yeah, this one definitely like has a handful of... I don't know. It just seems like the album that most people remember getting when they were kids as Weird Al, and or not kids as Weird Al, although that would be pretty cool. But a lot of people I've talked to like heard this album when they were really young, and they really remember it and are very nostalgic for it. So it definitely like this and Bad Hair Day, which came right before it. I guess the '90s output really took off for whatever reason.
Yeah, what's so interesting to kind of, how do I want to say, almost conceptualize or ground Weird Al's career is that, I think still to this day, I don't know if there's any question that I think you could easily call him the king of parody. And so many parody artists have evolved from an homage to Weird Al. And what you mentioned, Mandatory Fun, I'll get back to Running with Scissors, but you mentioned Mandatory Fun. And what's so interesting about Mandatory Fun is it came post YouTube, where YouTube had this kind of explosion of parodies. None of them were good, but I almost wonder if that explosion of parody helped elevate Weird Al even more than he already had been, because I would never have called him niche necessarily. Now, maybe if you go back to his early career,
like
once
80s.
He was working with Dr. Demento in the 80s, there was definitely a niche market there. But once you got into the 90s and he was putting out not only very funny music, but very funny music videos. If people have not seen the Running with Scissors music video parodies, I believe it was either Running with Scissors or Poodle Hat that they were associated with. Those things are amazing. The parodies of the interviews with like Celine Dion and Eminem, I would probably guess it was the probably centered around Poodle Hat.
It was between both of them. I think he was doing the MTV bumpers from the mid to late 90s up until like the early 2000s. I know like the Eminem one, for example, was specifically because Eminem didn't want him to do a music video for his parody on Poodle Hat. So he was doing them for like a good while. There's tons of them too, if you look them up on YouTube.
Those are absolutely hilarious. Also in the 90s, around this time, he had basically a parody of VH1's old Behind the Music, where they did a Behind the Music of Weird Al, and it was just all completely BS nonsense. And all of that stuff, I feel like, elevated him to the 90s. But then once this, frankly, renaissance of parody, now whether that renaissance was like worthy of that or not, because honestly most of the YouTube parodies, especially in that time frame around Mandatory Fun, were just straight garbage.
Oh my god, Bart Baker.
Yeah.
Oh no.
But I feel like that kind of helped elevate his career. But what was interesting, and this is kind of where I go back to Running with Scissors, I feel like this was the album that really took him to that next level of notoriety. Because after this album, you not only get those things that I talked about, where he's working with VH1 and others, but he's also being referenced in Simpsons, and he has, he's having all these appearances on talk shows, and he's just not only is his music funny, but he is just a genuinely very funny dude. In fact, I would very highly encourage everyone to follow Weird Al on Twitter, because he is consistently hilarious there too.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit wrong in a way, just in one characterization. Like, I think what's actually probably more amazing than Running with Scissors isn't that this album. Well, no, it wasn't this album. It was Off the Deep End a couple albums before with the Nirvana parody, and then it was Bad Hair Day with like Amish Paradise, and then it was this. I think this was in a line of albums that did this, but Weird Al, actually in the 80s when he started parodying Michael Jackson, was huge. Like, Weird Al first came to notoriety by like his second album with like Eat It, because Eat It charted. I forget that sometimes, but like a parody song that charted in the 1980s it's just crazy. And that was because of MTV, because he had these like amazing, hilarious parodies of Michael Jackson music videos. Like the Eat It video is better than the fucking Beat It video, okay? Like his stuff was just so good. And then there was Fat. But after the Michael Jackson parodies, like he just plummeted. And he released that movie, UHF, and it did terribly. And like it looked like he was just done. But what's amazing is that with that Nirvana parody, and then past then, he like revitalized his career, and instead of just being like the parody guy who does Michael Jackson, and makes songs about food or whatever, which is what he was famous for in the 80s, he was now like a cultural icon, and that status has not gone away. Mandatory Fun, you could say, kind of reignited it too, but it wouldn't have mattered. Like this string in the 90s basically solidified him as that. And Yeah, I mean, like, I do think this is his best record. I don't think this is necessarily the one that shot him there. It was this to me seems like a victory lap, and it's like the best victory lap ever. It's like,
which is very fitting considering the album art,
the cover
of
yeah.
Running with,
which is like, but and it really does play out that way because, like, seriously, it just feels like this is such a confident and assured comedy album, and it's so funny. Like, the thing about Weird Al's comedy is that I don't know. It seems like most people like Weird Al just because he's Weird Al. Just people like him. Like, who doesn't? Very few people don't like Weird Al, but like his comedy style is just incredibly corny. That's the entire gag. I mean, like, a lot of his parodies were about food, or really silly things like that. There's like Grapefruit Diet on this, might be the only one. But before now, it was like so many food parodies. And he just seems really nerdy and really geeky. And it's like, this is humor that I don't know if there's any other human being or any other comedian that pulls this off. Like, I can't think of one. Certainly not in music. I mean, when you're talking about musical comedy, you already have a limited field of, like, truly great artists, I think. But, like, Weird Al just has really ascended them all. Quite possibly the only good parody artist to ever exist. And even as that, it's like, it's just amazing how stupid and clean and corny his comedy is, considering how well it works. But I think it's just like his persona is so likable and so convincing. It's just so hard not to have fun with it.
And quite smartly, I might add, it definitely did not hurt that the first track on this album is a parody of American Pie about Star Wars, right when Star Wars fever was at its absolute peak, because the specific title track is about Episode 1, which comes out in that same year. Remember, even on mainstream radio, Saga Begins would play quite frequently because there was so much buzz for Episode 1 at the time.
Yeah, and he wrote the song based on what was known about the movie before it came out. It was not out yet when he wrote this parody, and he got it, like, dead on. It's really funny. I think I've seen him talk about interviews. I think he was looking through Star Wars fan sites and stuff to figure out what the plot was going to be. It was something like that, but it's just such a, like, it's just so incredible that he managed to pull it off, because, like, you can listen to this song and it is convincingly its own song about Star Wars, even though it's based on, like, a song that was like 20 years old by this point. And it's like he just turns it into something new. It's so funny how it works out. There's not even many jokes in it. It's like the song itself is just a joke. It's like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? But it is quite awesome.
And the other thing that I will mention, and this is really why personally I find him to be such a profoundly good parody artist, is that there are a lot of songs in his repertoire where, and you know, this could just be my own personal upbringing, but I'm sure I'm not the only one, to where I feel like a lot of the times I think of his lyrics, sometimes even more so than the actual song lyrics, because his parodies are just so good. There's just, I mean, obviously musically he's just taking from the actual tracks themselves, but he's not just doing that. Like, his band, all the musicality of his entire group is just so spot on, and a lot of times to the point of his impressions of the performers who perform the original song are so spot on that they almost take on their own entity and identity in a really interesting way, versus a lot of the kind of low-level parodies that you might find elsewhere, where they just get so washed over by the actual tracks themselves.
Well, a great example of that is Pretty Fly for a Rabbi, which is like his impression of Dexter from The Offspring is like insane. It is like identical. I cannot tell them apart. And it's also good too. It's like, it's a song that's just making fun of a group of people, which is like probably not great, but like it's almost everything he ever does feels so tasteful. You know, like it always seems like what he's doing is in good faith, or sorry, in good taste and good faith, but in good taste. Like I don't think anybody could get. Like, is it possible to get mad at Weird Al for anything? I don't know. There was one moment on this album I thought was kind of unfortunate. Jerry Springer is a song I don't think he would be particularly proud of today. I don't think it's the kind of thing he would make today. It's sort of a product of its time. I think it's a funny song, but there are definitely some things in there where it's like, yeah, Al, it probably shouldn't have stepped there. But like other than that, it's like it really does just his comedy is incredibly tasteful, and yet I don't think it feels like plain or bland. And God, I have to say the one of the funniest songs here is a style parody of like third wave ska. Your horoscope for today. That song is so incredible. It's like it's one of his funniest tracks, one of his funniest original songs, and it's like, oh, it's just like like that's just a riot. What else? There's one I'm intentionally avoiding. Oh yeah, My Baby's in Love with Eddie Vedder is great. Like definitely a little dated maybe now, but it's like a great mockery of Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, kind of making fun of grunge. The song itself isn't styled like a grunge song, but the that's kind of the topic. Oh, and then something you mentioned is that the style parodies were on point. Germs is like a style parody of a Nine Inch Nails song, and it is spot on. Like, it's spot on, and it's just funny the direction he takes it. Because I think instead of doing like that incredibly dark and like introspective, depressing stuff that Trent Reznor would do, he makes it into a song where like he's a germaphobe, and yet it still sounds like something you could actually imagine being a real Nine Inch Nails song.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, you know, the parodies on this one are very good too. I mean, we've already talked about a few of them. You mentioned a couple of them, but It's All About the Pentiums is also a very good parody. This one, I think, was interesting in that I feel like it almost leaned a little heavier on the non-parody aspect, and I think that's why this specific album stands out to me, because he does have a lot of originals or things from his other lines of work, such as like the Weird Al show theme is on this album, which was the theme to kind of this cartoon show, this like very low lasting show that he had. But other than that, you have some of, I think, his best parody songs in like The Saga Begins and some others here.
Yeah, I think what's great is that the parodies like blend perfectly with the originals in this album. It's a mix he doesn't find on most of his records. I think a lot of times his originals are incredibly hit or miss. And on a lot of his other albums, even some of his better ones, they often feel like the points where the album is just kind of like not really worth it. This album is like, some of these originals are better than the parodies. Of course, top of those being Albuquerque, which is like the best song that Weird Al ever did. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard in music in my life. One of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life, period. Like, it is incredible. It's like an 11-minute diatribe. That's actually genuinely like a pretty entertaining song musically, too. The sort of spoken word over like a very, very consistent, quick groove. But God, it is like, it's just like he keeps going off on tangents and overextending the tangents where they go on way too long. Everything that happens in this is just so incredibly absurd. It is unbelievable. It's one of the most creative comedy songs he ever did, if not the most creative comedy song he ever did. And like, it feels like this entire album like builds up to it, and it makes it easily his most satisfying package, because like you're really, really satisfied at the end. I really don't think he has a better song, parody or otherwise, than Albuquerque. It is a masterpiece.
And I will mention, I don't know if he does it that much anymore, honestly, because who would blame him? But seeing him perform that song live is a trip.
I've seen it. I've seen videos of it, and I did one time see it when I was a kid. I saw him live and saw him do it. But since then, I've seen him live. He has not done it. But you are right.
Okay, so want to wrap this one up, Lewis?
Yeah, that's cool. So I would give this album an 8. I think. Again, it's definitely his most consistent record. Everything really blends together. It's a very consistent, satisfying package. I would say there are probably albums of his that have more of his funniest songs, in the sense that, like, the tracks that rank up there among his best, there's like more of them in them, but those albums are always like a lot more hit or miss. This one just strikes out every time. Even the weaker tracks here are still pretty good. And it has Albuquerque on it. Like, I don't think you can go wrong with this. If you're only going to listen to one Weird Al album, which is all you really need, it needs to be this, because you can watch all of his parody videos. That's something you should definitely do. But when it comes to like album listening, it's not always worth it. It sometimes is, not always. But here, absolutely. So I definitely recommend this.
And I agree. I pretty much would say the exact same. I give it right around an 8. Clear. This one is absolutely a standout for me in his repertoire.
Okay, great. So should we move on to what I recommended to you, Stephen?
Yes.
All right. So last time I recommended to Stephen The Money Store by Death Grips. This is technically a re-rec because a year or two ago, I can't remember when we did it, but I recced Stephen No Love Deep Web, which I always kind of regretted, just because it's not one of my favorites by Death Grips, and also I don't think it's representative of them anyway, and whatever the case. But Stephen notoriously loathed it, and I was curious to see, I guess we're all curious to see, if it's any different here. The Money Store was the major label debut of Death Grips. They actually somehow got signed to a major label after their original mixtape Ex-Military caught on. And this is the only thing they were able to release on it, because No Love Deep Web was essentially designed as a stunt to get off of their label right after. But it's still insane to me that this was released on Epic. Like, I can't believe that. It's got to be one of the most left field releases from like a major label. And that's definitely notable. But anyway, Stephen, what did you think of Death Grips, The Money Store?
Well, I will say right off the bat that I enjoyed this one a lot more than No Love Deep Web, that's for sure. I mean, it would be hard for me to enjoy it less, seeing as I think I gave No Love Deep Web like a 1 or a 2, somewhere in that range. But I absolutely vibed with this album a lot more than anything off of No Love Deep Web. Pretty much right from the title track, it felt like to me they had a energy that was a little bit different. It didn't feel as grating as I remember No Love Deep Web being. It's been a while since I've even thought about that album, honestly. But just in general, like track to track, I felt like it had more consistency. I felt like it flowed a lot better, and there were very minimal tracks on this album that I actually didn't enjoy or got bored with at any point. I mean, pretty much from track 1 all the way to track 13, I had quite a good time with this one. I think that their flow is really on point. I felt like vocally, like MC Ride vocally for me, this was a lot more powerful. This was a lot more consistent. This was a lot more coherent as well in a lot of the tracks. The one that really stands out to me, and maybe just because it's the last track, honestly, is Hacker. That one really had some rhymes that I enjoyed quite a bit, but then just from a flow, from a sonic level, I felt like was a very consistent, I think it's like a 4.5 minute track or something like that. And that, as a microcosm of this album as a whole, I feel like really showed me what Death Grips could be, and actually made me interested to listen to more. Versus No Love Deep Web, if that was the only thing I listened to from this band, I would be absolutely okay with that. But now that I've heard something else, something different, I actually really enjoy what they're putting out there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, they definitely have, especially in their early career, I mean, it's only been about 10 years now anyway, like 9 years. But especially in these first few records, they were incredibly versatile. Like Ex-Military, The Money Store, No Love Deep Web, Government Plates, and The Powers That Be, all of these albums are very different, which makes them a trip to go through. I mean, they also vary a lot in quality, to be sure, but like, it really, like, I think one of the things that brought this group to the forefront of the music scene in general, I was going to say the hip-hop scene, but that's not really true. It took a while for, I think, the hip-hop community to accept Death Grips, if they even have. But, like, certainly early on, that wasn't really where this was catching on. And to be sure, like, there are so many musical elements going into this that even calling this group hip-hop is, like, really hard, especially now. But even then, like, there's a lot of electronic, a lot of, like, synth punk, hardcore. There's just, like, so much going on here. But this record, like, it is mind-blowing to me, just how much they were able to pack into this album. Most of the sounds you hear are samples. There's a great video I actually highly recommend to you, to anybody, that goes through all of the samples on The Money Store. I forget who did it, but if you search it, I'm sure you'll find it. And it's crazy. Like, to hear the samples and then to hear the way that they were manipulated and what they were turned into. It is insane. Like, this is just brimming with creativity in every single song. And what's even more impressive, and I think it speaks to you being able to really enjoy this and vibe with this, is that despite how maximalist this album is, despite how much they shove into every song is so coherent. Like, they're really hooky, they're really catchy. I've had almost every single song on this album stuck in my head at some point. And still do every now and again, just get a song from this stuck in my head. Like, and that's even alongside these shifting samples in the background. Some tracks have samples that show up only at one moment, just kind of out of nowhere. I think in, like, Double Helix, there's a part like that. And yet, they keep it all on track, which is almost unbelievable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially even from track one with that get ga 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 ga. It's like so catchy.
Yeah, right off the bat too. It opens the record with that.
It hooked me so instantly, and then I feel like, and maybe that's one thing I will mention about No Love Deep Web is I feel like there was never any part of that album that hooked me and had me wanting to listen to it more, whereas this opened up and so instantly hooked me that I would even be willing to dive deeper in, you know, like you just mentioned, look into some of those samples and do some of that stuff, because I feel like this album really clicked with me in a way that I will say 100% was not expecting. But pretty much top to bottom, I just really enjoyed what they were putting out here.
I think something that's so great about this is that this is one of those albums that there aren't a ton of albums like this, but this is one of those albums where, like, I can look at every song on, like, this on my screen or on the track list or whatever, and I can associate it with a hook. Every single track. Except maybe Fuck That. But I can associate Fuck That with, like, the weird off-kilter drum groove. Like, every single song here, whether it be something instrumental or something lyrical, like, it's got something that you recognize from it. Which is, like, again, for something that's this experimental, for something that's this cutting edge, for something that's this left field, and for something that, you know, a lot of people hear and get immediately turned off, like, and wonder if it's even music. You know, it is incredible how catchy and just overall, like, memorable that this record is, and that it manages not to leave the listener behind and yet still just blow your mind. I mean, so many of these tracks have moments in them where it's just so mind-bending. Like, I think of the hook on The Fever when that synth line comes in, and it's just like, it feels like it's all over the place. It's so crazy. Or like on Lost Boys, where in the hook, like, it keeps skipping a beat. Or even on that track, the opening, how it opens with, like, this mechanical noise that is really free-flowing, it has no rhythm, and then it suddenly gets sucked into the beat and follows along with the drums. It's like all these little moments where I'm just like, I'm in disbelief almost that, like, I'm hearing something that is coming together this well, and yet expanding my mind that much.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something that's interesting to me because I feel like they pushed a lot of that too far for me personally on No Love Deep Web, versus here, that stuff was sonically interesting enough to keep me engaged throughout the entirety of the album. There is definitely stuff that I've listened to from this podcast where they take a lot of those concepts and push them, I think, too far. No Love Deep Web and some others that we've listened to, and this is one where I actually see the appeal of that sort of a thing.
Yeah, and it's and all that's fantastic. Something that you brought up that we didn't touch on too much. I mean, MC Ride vocally in this record is incredible. Like, and I think he generally was in this era from like Ex-Military to No Love Deep Web. Something that he lost after a while, I would argue anyway, is there is this really consistent like lyrical character that he builds on these records, especially on the Money Store and No Love Deep Web, where he's like this paranoid, violent, hyper masculine. I would say hyper violent, not just violent. Like all of these like maybe hip hop personas that you can think of are all like just exacerbated by him, and especially with his like yelling, almost screaming delivery on most of the songs here. And then couple that with the whizzing electronics of all the beats, it like creates such a compelling character narrative on these early records, where like if you read these lyrics, they are incredibly disturbing. But when you think of music like this, music that is this abrasive, that is this off-putting, you know, it matches the lyrical content. There's like really a point to it on this. Whereas once Death Grips got themselves situated with their audience, they could do these sounds and just couple them with honestly word salad nonsense. Like I think of most of Bottomless Pit ends up being like that because it stopped being about that. It was all about the sound. But I feel like early on, they had like a real vision going into these records of exactly the kind of message that they wanted to carry through. And I feel like you feel it on every single layer of the album.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think from you've hit on some of this, but also, you know, not just MC Ride, and I honestly believe that pretty much everyone here is just straight killing it on pretty much every track. And even from the onset with Get Got going into the Fever, things like Double Helix and System Blower, the more industrial tracks, all of it is just so well produced, I feel like, because that was the other thing that I would mention is in a lot of cases, I think that where my dislike for some of that industrial stuff comes from is on the production side. Whether that production would be considered good or not, if it's not produced in a certain way, I feel like just I don't click with it as well as I did here. But the production element of all of the tracks on here really vibed with me on the Money Store as well. And that's something that I don't feel like I personally call out that much, Lewis. Usually that's a call out for you, but it was like such a marked thing for me in this specific case. I thought it would be really relevant for me to kind of talk about it a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's again, I mean, it really is just astonishing, like the level of chaos that is in this production, and yet is audible, is coherent, is adhering to the structure the song set up. I mean, that takes a remarkable amount of skill. Very few people will ever attempt this. Like, even you think of a lot of abstract hip hop, like, part of the point is that it's disjointed. But, like, Death Grips took this, and it is not disjointed at all. And that is mind-blowing.
Okay, so Lewis, I don't know if I have much else to mention. I don't know if there's anything you want to say before I kind of wrap it up.
No, not really.
Okay, so I think this is going to really surprise, honestly, a lot of our listeners, and kind of whiplash compared to the album that, I guess, in chronological order comes next for them. Is that right?
No Love came after this, yes, yeah.
Came after that, right. So I actually will go as far as probably giving this a 9. Like, I don't think this is necessarily tops one of my favorite albums of all time to where I might go a 10, but honestly, and I'll be real here, I'm like kind of getting there. I feel like after some more listens to this thing, it could very well be. But right now, just from the few listens that I had to get ready for the podcast, I just enjoyed it so much, even from the onset, even from the first listen to where I just kind of had it on in the background. It captured me in a way that I wanted to listen to it more intensely. I'll just a peek behind the curtain for kind of how my process for when you recommend an album to me. Typically, I'll listen to it as kind of like a background album, and then I'll listen to it in a more thorough listen, and then I might listen to it one or two more times. Usually that thorough listen, I might feel like I'm forcing myself to do so, but this is one of the first albums where I can definitively say I enjoyed that experience, and I wanted to have that experience after the initial kind of in the background listen. So because of all that, I give The Money Store a 9. And I would definitely recommend this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, obviously, I give this a 10. This is one of the greatest albums of all time, I think. It's already gone down in a lot of places as being considered one of the best albums of the decade. I mean, because this was like I don't know if it's a pivotal moment, because I don't really think the game shifted because of Death Grips, although they definitely influenced a lot of major artists. But like even David Bowie actually cited them. So like they definitely did have that, but it was a seminal moment in the sense that like I remember even like maybe 2014, this was still like really contentious. Like, yeah, Death Grips had their incredibly vicious, always online, annoying fandom that has died down a lot since then. But there was a lot of people who like were not ready to accept this at all, because this really did push those boundaries. I mean, I think a lot of people in the circles that I frequent sort of would scoff at the idea of this album being super experimental. But like, it was. Like, this album turned off so many people. This freaked out so many people that, sure, it might be really catchy. It might be really hooky. But, like, this pushed boundaries. And again, it did so in a way that is captivating and that, like, is fun. The fact that you say you like wanted to sit down and listen to this, I mean, like, yeah, you almost never say that for any of the records you hear. And it's an album like this. You know, I think that this is, without a doubt, the crown jewel of their discography. The Powers That Be comes close-ish. But, like, this is a masterpiece. And I have no doubt that when we look, like, 10, 20 years down the line, this will still be an album people listen to and people try to get into. So, like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I completely recommend this. And I would also say, Steven, you know, The Money Store is a great album to like get into Death Grips and to start to understand what they do. I would be curious, and maybe we could set it up where you report this in the intro next episode. Just like one listen to No Love Deep Web and see if you get it now. Like, see, I shouldn't say get it, but see if like you can start to like, see if you can start to enjoy it now that you've been accustomed to more of their harsher elements. I mean, I would say it's a very different record, but like, it's also not the album you generally start people on Death Grips with. So I would be curious about that, actually. I wonder if we could set that up.
Yeah, it could be interesting even maybe to have a episode where we have a re-rec, but it's literally like a redo of something.
Something earlier. Yeah, that could, yeah.
Okay, well we can talk about it. With that, we can move on to the recommendations.
All right, you go first.
Okay, so Lewis, I'm going to recommend to you something a little different, something we haven't done before. So I'm going to recommend to you technically a board game, although the medium in which I'm going to recommend it to you is an app that you can get. So I guess you could consider it a digital board game, is how I probably think about it. So you can find it on Steam and also, I believe, on iOS. But the board game itself is called Legendary, a Marvel deck building game. Legendary is a game that came out in 2013. It is a cooperative board game where you are recruiting Marvel heroes to fight together against a Marvel supervillain. Essentially, every turn, you're using points to either buy new Marvel or new superheroes to add to your deck. So as the game goes on, you get slowly stronger, and new villains will come out onto the playfield to try to stop you from winning. There's a lot of customizability because the heroes that you play with, the villain that you fight against, and even how you win or lose can change playthrough to playthrough. And at this point, I believe it came out in 2013 or very late 2012. At this point, they have an insane number of expansions. Specifically, Lewis, I am recommending to you, it is called Legendary DXP. Essentially, it is the exact same game as base Legendary to a T, but they stripped out all of the Marvel IP. So it is kind of the exact same systems and mechanics, but they created their own heroes, essentially. So that way they could get it on Steam and on iOS and other platforms.
Okay, great. This will be a bit of a different episode because I'm recommending a game to you as well. And I'm recommending to you Bloons Tower Defense 6. I think it's Bloons TD6 is the way that is the actual title, I guess. That game came out in 2018. I don't know if you're familiar with the series, but most people who had computers in the last 20 years probably are. It started out as a couple of Flash games just called Bloons that turned into tower defense games based on that, which were really rudimentary tower defense games originally, but they caught on so much, especially by the third one, that now with the newest game, or I think there's an Adventure Time one or something that came out after, but sure, the newest mainline Bloons tower defense game, it is like a very full-fledged game now. It's on both mobile and Steam. I know it costs less on mobile. I don't know. I'm pretty sure mobile's fully functional, though. So, I mean, if you want to get it that way. Though I'd recommend it on a PC. Yeah, I guess we'll talk about that next time. So, is that it? That's it, right? Yep, that's it. Oh, by the way, Steven, I have to say, you kind of contradicted yourself this episode, and it makes me really upset, and I'm sure it upset our chat really badly too, because you said that we don't accept or tolerate any other mediums than the ones that we've already recommended, and I happen to agree with that, but you have just broken my trust, because you've recommended to me a tabletop game, which is just out of this world. That is unacceptable. I will not tolerate this.
Well, to be clear, burn the tabletop version. Set that one on fire. Doesn't matter. I'm recommending to you the digital version. So still technically a video game.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sly. Nice job.
Who even needs tables anymore? Get rid of all the tables.
Yeah, God. I am actually going to become anti-table from now on, and I'm going to take up this cause with Get Recc'd.
Well, let's table that for now, Lewis, and look to the chat. Chat, we are live. We are doing this live. If you are on CastBox, we are not live. But chat, do you have any questions for us? We probably have a few minutes here to answer any questions or
I can
take
go
any
through
comments from
some
the
of
chatty chat.
I can go through some of what we have seen. I was told to review the new J Electronica album, or I'm banning you. Don't have any intents to do that.
And you can't ban us because this is our channel.
Yeah,
so.
We can ban you. We have Review the Power Ballin' by Chingy. I don't know what you're talking about. Review Discord Eurobeat Brony the Living Tombstone remix. Maybe next time.
Do we support... Oh, we can't say that.
Oh,
no.
Yeah, no.
A lot of people thought I would give the Money Store a 2 or a 3. And that's kind of what I probably expected going into this episode, that people would be very surprised that I was going to give it something much higher than what I gave No Love Deep Web. And then maybe here our final question from chat. Am I a Pinkie Pie fan? Absolutely not. Okay. Well, with that, Lewis, do you have any housekeeping items?
Follow us on CastBox. That's about it. I mean, we have to always be sorry that we take extra time. We try to do 2 weeks. It never really happens. So our apologies formally. Otherwise,
yes, Castbox is a great place to be able to listen to our podcast. One, if you cannot catch us live, but two, specifically if you are listening on a non-Wi-Fi source, you can download from Castbox. You could also theoretically, I guess, download from YouTube, but Castbox has a nice podcast integration, which makes it very easy.
Yeah, and I also think on behalf of both of us here at Get Recc'd, please stay safe with a pandemic going on right now. Try not to go to large crowded areas. Please follow the advice of health professionals. We'll see you next time, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's a perfect time to play along with us. We have 2 game recommendations that you can try, and then next week, give us your thoughts in the chat as well.
Yeah, so with that, I think that's pretty much it. Those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get Recc'd.